If you have a particular interest in television and or film, I suggest you have a seat, get your pad, get your pencil, and take notes. What an honor it was to sit down with this guest, and I won't say who it is just as of yet, but I will tell you, you're going to hear names and scenarios that will be quite interesting and informative and historical. So sit back, stay tuned, and enjoy this episode of Arts Resuscitation. I have the pleasure today of sitting with the world-renowned producer. He's now also an assistant professor, an actor. I mean, the list goes on and on. Mr. Chiz Schultz. Thank you very much for agreeing to sit down with me. I do appreciate that.
Happy to do it.
Thank you.
I don't know about the world-renowned.
Well, we think so anyway.
Thank you.
Okay, we really do. So I listed some of your attributes. Again, actor, film producer. You've worked on some very famous films. You wear so many different hats. Is there one that you prefer to wear more than the other?
I really like all of them. I started out in college as an actor, and I was in summer stock several seasons. I loved acting. And I got to New York after college graduation to be an actor, and I could not get arrested. So I joined the mailroom at CBS Television and began working on various dramatic shows as a production assistant, assistant to the producer, associate producer. But I worked with wonderful directors, wonderful actors, and eventually that led me to producing television and film. And I did that for a long time, over 40 years. And so that was the producing end of it. And then I started producing my own documentaries and features. Mm-hmm. And it got very slow, and I thought, well, I'd like to do something with all the time I have. And I applied to teach. And so I've been teaching at the New School University and Montclair State University for about 10, 11 years.
Oh, really?
As an associate professor. And then 4 years ago, or no, about 6 years ago, I still had some time, and I wasn't making enough money, really. And I wanted to make some money, so I got into real estate, and I became a real estate broker.
Wow. One more thing to add on to that long list of things you do so well.
Well, I joined a company out here, and we would have weekly meetings in which the manager would get us together and say, what's the most important thing in life? Let's hear it. And everyone would shout, money! And my stomach would just go like this. And I just hated it. I hated it. So about 3 to 4 years ago, I said, I'm out of here. I wasn't good at it. And a lot of people are, and it's a good business. But I wasn't good, and I didn't like it. And so I went back to my first love, acting, and started to apply for anything, extras, all non-union, and I've been acting ever since, and it's just been wonderful. I've had the best time of my life. So that's
great.
So I'm still producing, and still teaching, still acting.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
You mentioned your documentaries, and you're working on, or you've completed one on Paul Robinson?
I completed a 2-hour documentary for PBS, American Masters, on Paul Robeson, several years ago. And then I was working with Harry Belafonte at one point, and a friend of mine came to me and he said, Lorraine Hansberry's husband, this was after she died, has collected her works and written a really wonderful, wonderful play called To Be Young, Gifted, and Black. And it's totally based on her works, from her different plays and her life and everything. And we want to do it off-Broadway. Do you think Harry would invest some money? And I read it, and I said to Harry, this is something we got to do. And so Harry invested money, and we opened it off-Broadway, To Be Young, Gifted, and Black, at the Cherry Lane Theater, with a wonderful cast. Cicely Tyson, Barbara Baxley, Uh, just very good people. And it was the longest running play on off-Broadway that year. And we just broke even. The expenses were so great, but it was wonderful.
And when was this?
I'm terrible on dates.
About.
60s.
Okay.
After it was over, Bob Nemiroff, Hansberry's ex-husband, they had been divorced, came to me and said, I would love you to do a documentary on Lorraine Hansberry.
Mm.
And I got a bunch of people together, scholars, people who knew her, and just as I was really getting her developed, Bob died.
Mm.
But his widow, he had remarried, a wonderful, wonderful woman named Jewel Gresham Nemiroff. I got her involved, and she was really partners with me on it. We got people together, had a lot of meetings, and then that started trying to raise money, going to the National Endowment of the Humanities. And that was our first meeting, was 25 years ago.
Really?
And so our 2-hour documentary on Lorraine Hansberry is now, we've shot all the interviews.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is done, but we're now in post-production. And we're now trying to raise money for the post-production to finish it. And at one point, it was just too much for me. And I hired a wonderful, wonderful producer, director, writer named Tracy Strain, who was in Boston and who had worked on a lot of black series about the African American experience up in Boston for GBH.
Mm-hmm.
So she's the producer, director, writer. Her husband, Randolph, who's excellent, is co-producer and editor. And so I have a terrific team. And the interviews are wonderful. Just wonderful.
Really?
Wonderful.
I am sure. And where did you film most of this?
Wherever the people were.
Okay.
We shot a lot here in New York. We went to Los Angeles to interview Sidney Poitier.
Oh, wow.
And we got a wonderful interview with Sidney. At first he resisted. He said, I had a funny phone call. I had known Sidney when I worked with Belafonte.
Oh, really?
We had all done a feature together,
Mm-hmm.
Buck and the Preacher. And I called Sidney and I said, we have everyone else, we really need your interview.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, Chiz, you don't understand. He said, I'm 80 years old. I have a bad back. I cannot sit for an interview. And I've stopped giving any interviews.
Wow.
And I said, Sidney, I'm 79 years old. I'm willing to fly out with a crew to interview you. And he started laughing. He said, I thought you were younger than that. He said, okay, come on out.
Really?
And we just hit a wonder. We got an interview with Lloyd Richards, who directed A Raisin in the Sun,
Mm-hmm.
about 2 weeks before he died.
Really?
Ruby Dee. We just have wonderful, wonderful interviews. So I can't wait for it to be finished and in post-production.
And so do you have some time frame or...
Well,
How does that
we have to wait till April to find out if we get funding from National Endowment of the Humanities.
Okay.
But our goal is to try to have it finished for the anniversary of Raisin in the Sun, of when it opened on Broadway. And that's, I think, in 2015 would be an anniversary date.
Oh, okay, because it's scheduled to open again with Denzel and Diane Carroll in March,
In
isn't it?
March,
Okay.
correct.
Do you plan to go see it?
I'm there. I'm going to be there for the
You'll be
first
there?
preview.
Really?
Yeah.
That should be exciting with
Very
Diane
exciting.
Carroll. Oh, of course,
Oh,
Denzel,
wonderful.
but Diane Carroll.
Wonderful cast. Wonderful cast. That play is the most performed play in high schools throughout the country, still to this day.
Is it really?
Yeah, and the most read play. It has a power that just transcends time. It's just not dated.
And did or didn't it have something to do with Miss Hansberry's life? Because
Yes, yeah. Because in a way she is that young woman
Mhm.
who embraces Africa and embraces things of the African experience and the African American experience and wants to be something other than a maid or a nurse or a housekeeper. she wants to be a doctor, or that's
Right.
all Lorraine.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And although the family's not like Lorraine's, because she came from a very upper middle class family, the racism is the same.
Right.
They were attacked with bricks, people trying to move them out of their place, so that all of that's in the play. And so
Right.
all of that is Hansberry.
My first retirement was working for Williams. I also work as a chauffeur and stableman, part-time to help support my family. I work for Dr. Hess Green, and he's an addict. He's not a criminal. He's a victim.
The soldier story.
I did a soldier story, yeah, and that was interesting because a friend of mine, Charles Fuller, who was a very good friend, had written a play called A Soldier's Play, and it was performed off-Broadway, and I just thought it was wonderful. I was in on rehearsals. Charles asked me for rehearsals, so I sort of followed it, and then it opened and got incredible reviews, and but I thought it was one of the best plays I'd ever seen. I had worked on several features and television shows with a Canadian director, Norman Jewison, who's very well known and a wonderful director. And I called Norman and I said, "You've got to see this play. This has got to be a feature." And he came down. He was shooting a film in Canada, but he came down and he saw it and he immediately optioned it.
Really.
And then we started going to every studio, and they said that it's primarily an all-black cast. How are we going to get an audience? We said, well, there is an audience for that. I said, yeah, but we can never sell it overseas. And excuse after excuse after excuse. And Norman persisted. And finally one studio came along and said, if we give you practically nothing for the budget, we'll take a chance on it. And they gave us practically nothing
You are kidding.
for the budget. And it won, well, it got 3 Academy Award nominations.
Yes, yes,
And did good business.
Great
Not great
cast.
business, but good business. Had a wonderful cast.
yes.
And that was just what, Norman directed it beautifully.
So when you are working with a film such as Soldier Story and you have the great cast members, as a producer, I know that the director is very hands-on, but as a producer, what is your relationship with the members that have been cast for the play, the actors?
Well, with any feature film that I produce, or it's anything, a documentary, whatever, if you have a really good director, if you have a really good production manager, the producer can really the producer is the only one that has an overall look at everything.
Okay.
The budget, the production schedule, the casting, everything that happens. But if you have good people as casting directors, production manager, director, all of that stuff, you just sort of check it out. You don't get too involved because that's their expertise.
Okay.
But you're the only one that has an overall look.
Okay.
So that if, let's say, you do a scene and there's a take, and the director says, I think that's good, and you don't think it's good, you have to step in
Okay.
very nicely and say, I think there could be a little more energy. Could you do one more take?
Okay.
Now, that doesn't happen often if you have a good director, because they want another take. But you've got to step in if you see something that isn't right. Or if a casting director suggests someone that isn't right, you've got to speak up.
I was going to ask about that.
Everything,
Okay.
everything.
Okay. So the protocol really starts at the executive producer, is that?
Not really, because often now, that's a misused term, but executive producer is often either a network executive,
Oh.
a Hollywood studio executive, a major investor. The only one who has the final say really is the producer.
Okay. Okay. Glad you cleared that up.
Yeah.
As I go to my school every morning in Brooklyn, I pass the Paul Robeson Theater. Are you affiliated with that at all, or do you often do
Not
it?
at all.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
nothing to do with that. It took me, I think, about 8 years to finally persuade Paul Robeson's son to allow me to do the documentary.
Really?
And that was just through a friend of mine who knew Paul Robeson Jr. and put a good word in. And then I met with Paul several times. But Paul Robeson Jr. had kept his father's everything about him to himself. He was so afraid that if anything were done, it wouldn't be done well. And he finally realized, if I don't let someone do it soon, it'll never be done. And most of the people to interview will be dead. And so I was very fortunate, and he was extremely helpful. He was executive producer on it.
Okay.
We worked very closely together. The other interesting thing was people would say, "What are you working on?" And I would say, "I'm doing a documentary on Paul Robeson." They'd say, "Who's that?" 95% of the people had that reaction.
Really?
And it was because he was successfully wiped out by the FBI, the CIA, the McCarthy
Really?
Committee. Not only could he not go abroad to concerts, no Hollywood studio was allowed to hire him, no concert hall was allowed to hire him, after they accused him of being a communist, which he wasn't.
Right.
And then finally, the final blow was they got to every major textbook publisher in the United States and said, "You've got to remove his name from
Oh
every
my
textbook."
goodness. Wow.
And boy, were they successful.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sadly, unbelievable. And he was such a gifted person in so many.
He was a Hollywood star. He was a concert star. He was a star on Broadway.
Right.
He was a civil rights activist.
Good athlete. I mean, he just.
Top athlete, top student, lawyer.
Yes, right. What more could you ask for?
Wiped out.
Unbelievable.
Let me shift to Hansberry,
Okay.
because
okay.
that's what you're talking about.
Okay.
So post-production, same thing. We have to get still photographs of her. We have to get any footage that was shot of her or her plays or people in it to sort of give an idea of what Greenwich Village was like then, what New York was like then, what Chicago was like. Her house where she grew up, we'll have to get that footage.
And where was that?
And that, pardon me?
Where was that? Where is her?
In Chicago.
Okay.
And then in Greenwich Village, she had an apartment that she got with Bob Nemiroff, her husband at the
Okay.
time. Then we have to have a composer do a musical score. And then we have to do the editing. And then we have to do the sound mix to put all of the sounds together.
Wow.
And the editing to get it down from maybe 6 to 10 hours of footage that we'll have to 2 hours.
Oh,
Actually, under 2 hours.
and that can be a very
That's tough.
challenging
That's tough.
thing. Yes. Yes, when you have so much footage that you really, really
Love
want to
it.
keep and you want to share it with everyone, but because of time constraints,
Love
you have to.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know, kudos to the editor. That's going to be a tough job, but I'm
Tough.
sure it's going to be a beautiful one at the end.
I hope. We had a thing happen on Robeson when we went up to New England to interview Howard Fast, who's one of the great American novelists. And he was a member of the Communist Party in the 30s in Hollywood. And we wanted to talk to him about what the Communist Party was like, even though Robeson never belonged to it. And he was talking, and he said one of the problems we had was people don't realize in the 30s, the Soviet Union was, Russia was our friend, our ally. So everyone wanted to sort of join the Communist Party in Hollywood. All the actors were eager to get in, but we had to be careful, only to select ones that really could help. And he said there was one young actor whose career was on the rise. He was starting to get very hot, and he begged us to join the party. But we had a meeting of the party cell, and everyone said, he's a little bit of a goof-off, and he's just not that bright. I don't think we should let him in, but let's send someone to his house and tell him he can do more, not by joining, but just by helping on the outside. So they sent an actor named Eddie Albert to this guy's house and persuaded him not to. And I said to Howard, who was it? Who was the actor who wanted to get in? And he said, Ronald Reagan. And I said, Ronald Reagan? Now, the point of my telling you that is when we got to the editing room, we got to this, and I said, oh, and this part where he says who it is, my God, it's going to make publicity and everything. The director, Sinclair Bourne, the writer, Lou Potter, and the editor, whose name I've forgotten, said, that has nothing basic to do with the Robson story. That's got to come out. I said, come out. That's my favorite. They said, out.
Really?
And they were right.
Wow.
But it's a good example of that.
Yes.
Stick to
Yes.
the story. Stick
Yes.
to the person.
One last question. If you were talking to a young film student or a person like myself who is trying to move into the television world, what, other than the story must be good, is there anything else that you could add to that as how to approach it? Because you've done a fabulous job to it maintaining. Is there anything that you could tell us about that?
I emphasize several things. Most important is if you're going to become a filmmaker, you have to have passion and persistence. And I can't tell you how important those two are. First of all, you have to be passionate about wanting to do it. If you're going to do a film, want to do a film, you have to be passionate about that story. Whether it's a documentary, feature, short, animation, you've got to be passionate because it takes a long, long time. And persistent. I just recently I saw a film recently that's up for several Academy Awards, Dallas Buyers Club. There was a wonderful script for Dallas Buyers Club, and it attracted Brad Pitt, it attracted every major star. 20 years ago. They couldn't get the money, everyone read it and said, what, someone with AIDS and a transvestite? Are you kidding? Or a transsexual? No one's good. They persisted for 20 years. Finally, they got $30 million. I think something like and Matthew McConaughey to play the lead, and he lost all the weight.
Right.
And I think about a month or two before they were set to shoot, the investor pulled out.
Really?
They made a mad scramble. They found a Canadian investor and director, and the budget became $5 million. They could no longer afford the lighting, the cameras they wanted to use, so they had to use a lot of handheld, natural lighting, and it worked.
Yes, it did.
It worked better than if they had all that money.
Right.
But when I say passion, persistence, God knows those people were passionate and persistent, and now they're up for all these. And have won a lot of Academy Awards with that film.
I think Matthew, is he up for Actor of the Year? Is he up?
He's up for,
there's, like you said, there's several.
And the
nominations.
transsexual, Jared Leto's up for Best Supporting.
Wow.
It's a wonderful film.
As you continue your acting and teaching, is there anything that you haven't done that you really have a burning desire that's just one more thing I still want to do? I haven't done it, but I really want to do that. Is there anything?
I've been helped by so many people. Most of all, my wife,
Great.
who's seen me through all my nonsense, and my children, and so many people in the industry have helped me, have really been wonderful to me. And I've met so many interesting people, and I've worked with interesting people, and I've learned from them, the good and the bad. That I would like to at some point just sit down, even if I don't even care if it's published, but I'd like to sit down and thank you in a book form to all of these people as to what they did that improved my understanding, my knowledge of my life, whether it was professional or personal. I'd like to do that.
I hope you get to do that. That sounds like a wonderful thing to do.
I hope.
So you started in the film industry in about what year?
Well, I started in the TV industry basically in 1955.
Okay. And From that point to where the industry is now, have you noticed or seen any major changes, or I should say, what major changes have you seen?
Unbelievable. When I started in television, we shot live dramas on tape. It was 2 inches big. When we went to edit it, the editor, because the picture was here and the sound was here, would take scissors and physically cut around the tape. That was editing in 1955. Everything, when I went to Hollywood and we did television movies of the week on 35 millimeter, all of it was 35 millimeter.
Okay.
Everything, all features were 35 millimeter. Then all of a sudden digital comes in.
Okay.
And as of later this year, every major Hollywood studio has announced they will no longer make any 35 millimeter film. It's all going to be digital. So the 35 millimeter camera, enormous. I was on a film shoot about 2 months ago, and they as an actor, and they shot one of our scenes with a camera that was the size of a cigarette pack. I think it's called the GoPro. It's this big. It's like the size of your camera.
Yeah.
And I said, "What's that?" And they said, "It's a GoPro." I couldn't believe it. And they follow us around like this with the GoPro. So when I got to class the next week to teach my kids, I said, "You'll not believe it. There's a camera now called the GoPro." They went, "We know."
Yeah.
My students are way ahead of me. Things are moving so quickly, so it's hard for me to catch up. But I try to as much as possible.
Almost every day there's something new, so it's hard to keep up.
It's hard
for
to keep
anybody.
up.
Yes.
But the important thing I've learned is, if you don't have a story to tell, it just doesn't matter. You can have a GoPro, you can have digital, you can have 35 millimeter,
like that.
you can have perfect lighting, perfect sound, and it doesn't matter. You have to have a good story.
Well, I certainly appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. This has absolutely been fabulous and informative, and was certainly a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for asking me. I really appreciate it. I hope you have the passion and persistence to keep doing what you're doing, because it's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, Mr. Chiz Schultz on Arts Resuscitation with Dr. Hodge. Thank you.